The lawyer slid the will across the mahogany desk, and my sister actually laughed out loud. Not a chuckle. A real, sharp, cutting laugh, the kind that echoes off the walls of a room where somebody just lost everything. "Congratulations, little sister," Vivian said, still smiling. "You inherited a hole in the ground." I stared at the single sheet of paper in front of me. My hands were shaking. My father, a man who built a $2 billion financial empire from nothing, had left me one thing: a collapsed silver mine in the middle of the Montana wilderness. A place nobody had set foot in for over 100 years. My stepmother didn't even look up from her manicured nails. "Your father wasn't in his right mind at the end, dear. Consider yourself lucky he left you anything at all." That night, they had security escort me off the family estate. I left with a duffel bag, $400 in my checking account, and a rusted Ford Bronco that barely started. But what I didn't know, what nobody knew, was that my father had left me something else inside that mountain. Something worth more than his entire empire. A truth so dark it would send half my family to federal prison. And a stranger on a ranch a mile down the ridge who would risk his life to help me find it. My name is Eleanor Ashcombe, and this is the story of how a worthless hole in the ground gave me back everything they tried to take. The rain in Denver that Tuesday didn't fall. It punished. It came down in sheets, so heavy the black umbrellas bent under the weight. It drummed against the polished mahogany of my father's casket like 1,000 small fists demanding entry. It washed the scent of the white lilies clean off the arrangement and replaced it with something colder. Wet earth, broken stone, the smell of a hole being filled. I stood at the edge of the grave, with my hands folded in front of me, and I did not cry. I couldn't, because if I started, I wasn't sure I'd ever stop. My father, Walter Ashcombe, had built an empire from a single desk in a rented office in downtown Denver back in 1979. He had built Ashcombe Meridian Group into a $2 billion financial firm. He had shaken hands with 3 U.S. presidents. He had bought and sold companies the size of small nations before his morning coffee. And now he fit inside a box. Across the grave stood my sister, Vivian. She was 36 years old, dressed in a tailored black suit that probably cost more than most people's rent, and her eyes were as dry as chalk. She wasn't looking at the casket. She was looking at her phone, which she held cupped inside her palm, so the mourners couldn't see. Except I saw. I always saw. Beside her stood my stepmother, Isolde, 49 years old, and preserved like a museum piece. Silver blonde hair pulled back into a chignon, so tight it made my scalp ache just looking at it. She dabbed a lace handkerchief against her cheek. Delicate. Practiced. She had been practicing that gesture in the bathroom mirror. I would bet my father's watch on it. Isolde had married my father when I was 15. Vivian was already grown by then, 22, already climbing the corporate ladder our father had built. My mother had been gone for 2 years by that point. Ovarian cancer. She died on a Wednesday afternoon in April, with my hand in hers, and she was 43 years old, and the world has never made sense to me since. I was 29 now. I looked older. The priest was speaking. Something about ashes and mercy. Something about the peace that passes understanding. I couldn't hear the words over the rain and the roaring in my own ears. I just stared at the polished wood of the casket. And I remembered. I remembered my father teaching me to fish on the Colorado River when I was 7. His big weathered hands guiding mine on the reel. I remembered him showing up at my college graduation with tears in his eyes. I remembered the last time I saw him alive. 3 weeks ago. in the sunroom of the Cherry Creek estate, his hands trembling around a coffee cup, his voice thin as paper. "Ellie," he had whispered, "I need you to promise me something. Anything, Dad. When it comes, don't fight them. Just take what I leave you. Take it and go. And when you're ready, you'll understand." I had thought he was rambling. His mind wandering, they'd said. Too many painkillers, they'd said. But he wasn't rambling. He was warning me. And I hadn't listened. The priest closed his book. The casket began its slow mechanical descent into the wet Colorado earth. Vivian finally pocketed her phone. Isolde produced a single glossy tear, and I stood there in the freezing rain, with my hair plastered to my forehead, and I whispered the only words I could find. "I'm sorry, Daddy." Because I hadn't listened. Because I hadn't understood. Because I was about to learn just how right he had been. The lawyer's office was on the 32nd floor of the Republic Plaza building, and it smelled like old leather, expensive scotch, and money that had never been earned honestly. Nathaniel Pruitt had been my father's estate attorney for over 30 years. He was 71 years old, thin as a coat rack, and he wore reading glasses, so far down his nose they defied gravity. He had known me since I was in diapers. He had brought me a stuffed rabbit for my 6th birthday. I remembered it clearly. Blue ribbon around its neck. He would not meet my eyes. That was the first thing I noticed when I walked in. The second thing was that Vivian and Isolde were already seated. Comfortable. Prepared. Like they knew what was coming. Like they had helped write it. "Ellie," Nathaniel said, his voice hoarse. "Please, sit down." I sat on the edge of the leather sofa. My damp funeral clothes still clung to my skin. My hair was drying in strange ways against my neck. I felt small in that room. I felt 15 years old again, standing in the hallway of my father's house watching a stranger with silver hair walk in on his arm. Isolde crossed her legs. "Can we please get this over with, Nathaniel? I have a hair appointment at 4. A hair appointment. Her husband of 14 years was in the ground. And she had a hair appointment. Nathaniel cleared his throat, broke the seal on the envelope, began to read. The will was long. It was legal. It was suffocating. Vivian got 51% of Ashcombe Meridian Group, controlling interest, the board, the keys, the kingdom. Isolde got the Cherry Creek estate, the vacation house in Vail, the apartment in Manhattan, a trust fund of $40 million set up in her name. And then Nathaniel paused. His shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch. So small most people wouldn't have caught it. But I caught it. Because I was watching him the way a hostage watches the door. He turned the page. "And to my youngest daughter, Eleanor Grace Ashcombe." I held my breath. "I leave the entirety of the Silver Hollow claim in Ravalli County, Montana, including all mineral rights and surface structures. I also leave her my personal field journal and her mother's wedding ring." Silence. The kind of silence that has weight, that has temperature, that sits on your chest like a wet blanket. And then Vivian laughed. She actually laughed. It was a sharp, bright, cutting sound. The sound of a woman who had waited a long time for this exact moment. "Oh my God! Oh my God! He did it! He actually did it!" "Vivian," Nathaniel murmured. "No, no. Let me savor this." She turned in her chair to face me. "Do you know what the Silver Hollow claim is, little sister? Do you have any idea?" I didn't answer. Because I didn't. It's a hole. It's a collapsed silver mine in the middle of nowhere, Montana. Dad spent the last 2 years of his life throwing money into it. $500,000 in surveys and equipment. The county shut him down for safety violations. It is literally worthless. That is your inheritance, Ellie. A cave and a book and Mom's old ring." She laughed again. Isolde examined her nails. "Frankly, I think it's fitting. Your father lost his mind at the end. It's appropriate that he left his biggest failure to his greatest disappointment." The words hit me like a slap. My greatest disappointment. I had 2 master's degrees. One in environmental science. One in geology. I had turned down a job at the Denver corporate office because I wanted to work in conservation. I had spent 3 summers cleaning up mercury contamination in old mining sites for a nonprofit that paid me $32,000 a year. My father had told me he was proud of me for that. And now this woman who had married him for his money and treated me like an unwelcome houseguest for 14 years. This woman was calling me his greatest disappointment. I opened my mouth. I closed it. I looked at Nathaniel. "Is that all?" My voice was very quiet, very steady. I was proud of that voice. Nathaniel nodded. "Once." "That is all, Eleanor." He finally looked at me then. Really looked at me. And I saw something in his eyes that made my stomach turn to ice. It wasn't pity. It was guilt. Vivian stood up first. She smoothed her jacket. She checked her watch. And she looked down at me like I was a stain on the carpet. "Security will be at the house when you get there. You have until midnight to pack your things. Take what fits in one bag. Don't try to take anything that isn't legally yours. Vivi, please. Don't call me that." Her voice was ice. "You don't get to call me that. Not anymore." She walked out. The heavy oak door closed behind her with a soft, expensive thud. Isolde stood next. She adjusted her handbag on her shoulder. She paused at the door. "You know, your father used to talk about you. In his last months, when his mind was going, he would say your name in his sleep. It was very sad." She left too. And then it was just me. And Nathaniel. And the sound of the rain against the enormous glass window. I sat on the sofa for a long moment. I couldn't move. Nathaniel finally spoke. "Ellie, I'm so sorry." Don't." The word came out sharper than I meant it. He flinched. "Please, sweetheart. Let me explain. Your father. You knew." I finally looked up at him. "You knew what this would be. You wrote it. You signed it. You watched them do this to me. Ellie, was it money?" He said nothing. "How much did they pay you, Nathaniel?" His mouth opened, closed, opened again. "You brought me a stuffed rabbit for my 6th birthday. Do you remember that?" He remembered. I could see it in his face. I stood up. My legs were shaking, but I stood up. "Keep the rabbit." And I walked out. The estate was on a hill in Cherry Creek, surrounded by iron gates and blue spruce trees and a security wall that had once made me feel safe. Now it looked like a prison. 2 guards in dark suits followed me from the front door to my bedroom. They stood at the threshold while I packed, watching, not offering to help, not saying a word. I had grown up in this room. The walls were still painted the pale yellow my mother had chosen when I was 6 years old. There was a water stain on the ceiling from a leak my father had fixed himself one Saturday when I was 10, standing on a ladder in his old college t-shirt, cursing under his breath every time the wrench slipped. There was a chip in the doorframe where I had once slammed the door too hard as a teenager. I took a duffel bag from the closet. I packed what I could. 3 pairs of jeans, 5 shirts, a wool sweater, 2 pairs of boots, my canvas field jacket, a flashlight, a pocket knife my father had given me for my 16th birthday, my laptop, my phone charger, my mother's wedding ring, which Nathaniel had passed to me in a small velvet box, and my father's leather-bound journal. I didn't take any jewelry. I didn't take any photos. I couldn't bear to look at them. I zipped the duffel bag. I stood in the middle of the room I had grown up in, and I said goodbye to the yellow walls, to the water stain, to the chip in the doorframe, to the 17-year-old girl who had cried herself to sleep in this room the night her mother died, to the 29-year-old woman who was about to walk out of it forever. The guards followed me down the stairs. Isolde was in the kitchen with a glass of white wine. She did not look up. I walked past her without a word. The front door closed behind me. I heard the deadbolt turn from the inside. And that was the sound of my life ending. Or so I thought. My Ford Bronco was 10 years old, and the transmission slipped in second gear. The odometer read 183,000 miles. The gas tank was 3/4 full. I had $412 in my checking account. I had a duffel bag on the passenger seat. I had a manila envelope containing a deed to a collapsed silver mine on the floor. And I had no idea where I was going. I sat in the driveway of the estate, with the engine idling and the wipers pushing rain off the windshield in slow, tired arcs. I could go to a hotel. I could call my college roommate in Boulder. I could drive to the airport and buy a ticket to somewhere warm and start over. But my father's voice was in my head. Take what I leave you. Take it and go. And when you're ready, you'll understand. He had known. He had known Isolde would do this. He had known Vivian would let her. And he had left me a hole in the ground. Which meant the hole in the ground was not what it looked like. My father had never in his life made a bad investment. He had never in his life spent $1 without a reason. If he had left me a collapsed silver mine, then the collapsed silver mine mattered. I picked up the manila envelope. I opened it. The deed was inside. And underneath the deed was a topographical map, with a red circle drawn in my father's own hand, and a single sentence written across the top in his shaky, dying handwriting. Ellie, trust the mountain, not the men. Love, Dad. I stared at that sentence for a long time. Then I put the Bronco in drive, and I turned north. Montana is a long way from Denver. It is a long way in miles. It is a long way in time. It is a long way in the geography of the human soul. I drove for 2 days. The first night, I slept in a rest stop off Interstate 25 in Wyoming. I locked the doors. I climbed into the back seat with my sleeping bag. I stared at the ceiling of the Bronco, and I listened to the wind, and I did not cry. I still couldn't. The tears were locked somewhere behind my ribs, somewhere I couldn't reach. The second day the landscape began to change. The plains softened into rolling hills. The rolling hills lifted into foothills. The foothills grew teeth. By the time I crossed the border into Montana, the sun was setting behind the Bitterroot Range, and the mountains were the color of old bruises, and I had never in my entire life felt so small. I stopped for gas in a town called Hamilton. I bought a cup of black coffee and a package of peanut butter crackers. I asked the woman behind the counter for directions to a place called Silver Hollow. She looked at me for a long moment. You lost, honey? No, ma'am. I own a piece of property up there. She raised her eyebrows. Well, that's a first. Take Route 12 west out of town. Follow it until the pavement runs out. Then keep going. When you think you've gone too far, you're about halfway. Thank you. There's not much up there, sweetheart. Just old mining claims, and a general store, and a whole lot of nothing. A general store? Miss Opal's place. She's been running it 40 years. She'll still be open. Woman never closes. I thanked her again. I got back in the Bronco, and I drove into the mountains as the last of the daylight bled out of the sky. The general store in Silver Hollow was a low wooden building with a tin roof and a porch that sagged in the middle and a single bare bulb burning above the front door. I parked next to an old blue Ford pickup. I turned off the engine. I sat there for a moment listening to the tick of the cooling motor. Then I got out. The door had a bell. It jangled when I walked in. The store was small. 2 aisles. Canned goods. Coffee. Fishing lures. A wood stove burning in the corner. And behind the counter, watching me, an old woman. She was small, maybe 5 feet tall. Her hair was pure white, and pinned up in a soft cloud on top of her head. She wore a green flannel shirt, and reading glasses on a beaded chain, and there was a paperback novel open in front of her. She looked to be somewhere in her 70s. It was hard to tell. Her face had the kind of weathered softness that you only got from a lifetime of hard weather and hard laughter. She looked at me, and she froze. Her mouth opened, closed. She removed her reading glasses very slowly. "My lord," she whispered. I stopped in the middle of the store. "Ma'am, you're Walter's girl." My breath caught. "You're Walter Ashcombe's girl. You have his eyes. You have his exact eyes. My Lord in heaven." I couldn't speak. She came around the counter. She was even smaller up close. She stopped in front of me, and she looked up at me, and her own eyes filled with tears. "Which one are you, sweetheart? Are you Vivian? Or are you Ellie?" "I'm Ellie." "Oh, honey. Oh, sweet honey. Come here. Come here right now." And before I could think about it, she wrapped her small arms around me. And I stood there in the middle of a general store in a town I had never been to, being hugged by an old woman I had never met. And that was when the tears finally came. They came all at once. They came like a dam breaking. I stood there in the arms of a stranger, and I sobbed for my father, and I sobbed for my mother, and I sobbed for the girl I had been, and the woman I was, and the family I had lost. And she held me. She just held me. She didn't shush me. She didn't tell me it would be okay. She just held me. And I cried until I couldn't cry anymore. Her name was Opal Hensley. She was 73 years old. She had run the Silver Hollow General Store since 1985. She had known my father for the last 2 years of his life. She sat me down at a small wooden table in the back of the store, and she poured me a mug of coffee, and she cut me a slice of pound cake, and she watched me eat it. "Your daddy used to sit in that exact chair you're sitting in every time he came up. He'd have his coffee. He'd have his pound cake. And he'd talk about you." I put down my fork. "About me?" "About you, honey. Not your sister. Not your stepmother. About you." "What did he say?" She smiled. It was a soft, sad smile. "He said you were the best thing he ever did. He said you had your mother's heart. He said he'd made a lot of mistakes in his life, but that the one thing he'd done right was you." I couldn't breathe. "He said." He was worried. "He said he'd let his family fall apart. He said your sister was in trouble, and he didn't know how to help her. He said your stepmother was a snake." Those were his exact words. "A snake, Opal," he said. "And I have brought her into my house." Tears rolled down my cheeks. He was afraid, sweetheart. In those last months, he was very afraid. But he was making a plan. What plan? She stood up. She walked to a small wooden cabinet on the wall behind the counter. She opened a drawer. She pulled out an envelope, cream-colored, sealed with red wax. My name written across the front in my father's shaky handwriting. Eleanor Grace. She brought it to me. He gave me this 6 months ago, he said, Opal. If my daughter Ellie ever comes through that door, you give her this. I took the envelope in trembling hands. I could not open it. Not yet. Opal reached across the table and took my hand. Her fingers were thin and warm and strong. Ellie, whatever you find up on that mountain, you are not alone. Do you hear me? You come down here anytime, day or night. This store is your store. This table is your table. You are not alone. I nodded. I couldn't speak. Now, let's get you some supplies. That old cabin up at the claim hasn't been touched in years. You're going to need blankets, and matches, and a lot more coffee than you think. I drove the last 4 miles to Silver Hollow Claim, with the headlights of the Bronco cutting through darkness so complete it felt like driving through the bottom of an ocean. And then the trees opened, and there it was. The mine. It was a black mouth in the side of a granite cliff, a jagged opening about 8 feet high and 6 feet wide, choked with fallen timber and loose rock and a century of overgrown brush. To the left of the entrance stood a tin-roofed shack that leaned so hard to one side it looked like it was trying to lie down. I killed the engine. I sat in the Bronco, with my hands on the steering wheel. I stared at my inheritance. And I laughed. A short, sharp, broken laugh. Because what else could I do? I got out of the truck. The cold hit me like a fist. I forced the door of the shack open with my shoulder. The inside smelled like mildew, and dust and old coffee. There was a wood stove, a cot with a bare mattress, a wooden table piled with papers and maps and rock samples, a kerosene lamp, a window with a cracked pane. It wasn't a home, but it was mine. I lit the wood stove with hands that would not stop shaking. I lit the kerosene lamp. I sat down on the cot, and I looked around my new kingdom. I was completely alone. I was on a mountainside in Montana, with no cell service, and no neighbors, and no plan. And I did not know if I could do this. I laid down on the cot in my jacket and my boots. I pulled the sleeping bag over me. I watched the flames flicker inside the wood stove, and I whispered into the dark, "Help me, Daddy! Please, help me!" The wind answered. It moaned down the canyon like something living, and I fell asleep to the sound of it. The morning came in gray. I made coffee on the wood stove. I ate a granola bar. I stepped outside, and I looked at my inheritance in daylight. It looked worse. But the light was something else. The sun was climbing over the eastern ridge, and it was hitting the peaks of the Bitterroots and turning them gold. And for the first time in 3 days, I felt something other than grief. I felt curious. What did you find here, Daddy? What did you see? I went back inside. I sat at the wooden table. I began to sort through the papers. Geological surveys, topographical maps, photocopies of old newspaper articles from the 1880s, handwritten notes, rock samples in labeled bags, receipts for equipment, a safety violation notice from Ravalli County. 4 hours I read. I was standing in the middle of the shack in frustration when I heard the sound. Hoofbeats. Slow. Steady. Coming up the road from below. I froze. Then I moved. Fast. I stepped to the window, peered out through the cracked glass, and I saw him. A man on a horse. He came around the last bend of the road and drew up short when he saw the Bronco. The horse was a big chestnut mare with a white blaze down her nose. The man was tall and lean, and he sat the horse the way a man sits a horse when he's grown up doing it. He wore a canvas work jacket, a dark flannel shirt, faded jeans, scuffed brown boots, and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low against the morning sun. He did not look dangerous, but every woman who has ever lived alone knows that looking dangerous is not the requirement. I picked up the fire poker from beside the wood stove. I opened the door. I stepped outside. The man saw me. He touched the brim of his hat. "Morning, ma'am." His voice was low, slow. There was warmth in it. I did not lower the fire poker. "Can I help you?" He smiled. "Just a small one. I was going to ask you the same question." "My name's Silas Merrick. I run cattle on the property that borders yours. Been chasing a heifer that got out through a busted fence 3 days ago. I haven't seen any cow." "No, ma'am. I didn't expect you had. But I saw the smoke from your stove. Nobody's been up at the claim in months." "Not since—" He stopped. "Not since Walter passed." I felt my grip tighten on the fire poker. "You knew my father." His face changed then. It softened. "You must be Ellie." I did not answer. "He talked about you. A lot. He talked about you a lot, Miss Ashcombe." The fire poker slipped a little in my hand. "I'm going to get down off this horse. Real slow. And if you want me to leave, I'll leave. But you look cold. And I've got a pot of chili on the stove at my place about a mile down the ridge. And my mother would have my hide if I left a neighbor up here alone on her first morning without at least offering." I stared at him. His eyes were the color of a river in autumn, gray and green all at once. I lowered the fire poker. "Your mother?" "Yes, ma'am. She lives with me. She'd love to meet you." I looked at the shack behind me. I looked at the black mouth of the mine. Something in me, the part that was older than words, the part my father had once told me to trust, said stay. "Okay," I said. He nodded. "Grab your coat, Miss Ashcombe. It's a cold ride." The Merrick Ranch was tucked into a fold in the mountains a mile and a half down the ridge. A small log house with a green metal roof, a red barn, a round pen, a wraparound porch with 2 rocking chairs, smoke rising from a stone chimney, a creek running past the front yard, so clear you could count the pebbles on the bottom. It looked like something out of a painting. The front door of the house opened, and an old woman stepped out. She was small, thin. She wore a blue cardigan over a flowered dress. Her hair was silver and soft around her face and pulled back with a tortoiseshell clip. She had the same gray-green eyes as her son. She saw us coming. She smiled the whitest, warmest smile I had ever seen. And she said, "Well, hello, honey. Are you here for supper?" "Mama, it's only morning yet. This is our neighbor. Her name is Ellie." "Ellie." The old woman turned the word over in her mouth like it was a piece of hard candy. "Ellie. That's a beautiful name. Come inside, sweetheart." "It's cold out here." She reached out. She took my hand. Her fingers were warm, papery, strong. I looked at Silas. He was watching his mother with an expression I recognized. I had worn it myself, standing in a hospital room in Denver, watching my own mother forget my father's name in her last week. He met my eyes. He gave me a small nod. "She has good days," the nod said, "and she has hard days. Please be kind." I squeezed the old woman's hand. "Thank you. I'd love to come in." She led me across the porch and into the warmth of her kitchen. It smelled like wood smoke and coffee and cinnamon. There was a kettle on the stove. There was a Bible on the table. There was a hand-embroidered sampler on the wall that read, "Be still and know that I am God." "Sit down, honey." I'll pour you some tea. My name is Winifred, but everyone calls me Winnie. It's nice to meet you, Winnie. She patted my cheek. Her hand smelled faintly of rosewater. You have the kindest eyes. Has anyone ever told you that? Silas hung his hat on a peg by the door. He looked at me. Just for a second. His expression was unreadable. Yes, Mama, he said quietly. She sure does. That night I sat alone in the shack, with the wood stove burning and the wind pushing at the walls. I could not stop thinking about the Merricks, about Winnie's papery hand on my cheek, about the sampler on the wall, about Silas standing on the porch. I picked up the fire poker, and this time, I don't know why. Frustration, grief, some voice under the voice of my thinking mind. I swung it at the floor. The tip struck the wooden boards with a dull thud. Except one of the boards. One of the boards sounded different. Hollow. I dropped to my knees. I ran my hand across the plank. It was warped. The nails had been pried up and hammered back down more than once. My heart began to pound. I found a claw hammer among my father's tools. I wedged the claw under the plank. I pulled. The plank came up with a splintering crack. And underneath, in the dust and the shadow between the joists, a leather-bound journal. His journal. I sat down on the floor of the shack. I opened it with hands that would not stop trembling. The first page. In my father's shaking, dying handwriting. March 12th. They think I am losing my mind. Isolde looks at me like a nuisance. Vivian looks at me like a bank vault. Let them think what they will. What they do not know is what lies beneath Silver Hollow. It is not silver. The 1887 Bitterroot Coach robbery, everyone thinks it is a legend. It is not. I have found the records. The stagecoach carried gold from the Cheyenne Mint. The posse chased the bandits into this canyon. The bandits dumped the payload into a sinkhole above the mine to escape. They intended to return. They were killed before they could. The gold is still there. I know it is. And there is more than gold, Ellie. There is truth. And I need you to find it. I turned the page. I turned another. I read until the fire died down. I read until the sky outside the cracked window began to lighten. And I understood. Everything. My father had not been losing his mind. He had been the only one seeing clearly. He had left it all to me. That was the 7th night. I went outside to splash water on my face from the pump. The sky was the color of steel. I stopped, halfway to the pump, because there, in the frost on the ground beside the shack, 2 sets of boot prints. Fresh, deep. Someone had been standing right outside my window in the night. I turned in a slow circle, my breath fogging in the cold. The pines stood dark and silent along the ridge. And from somewhere down the mountain, faint and thin, and carried on the wind, I heard it, the distant hum of an engine, driving away. I stood there in the pale gray dawn, and I understood something my father had known before he died. I was not the only one who knew about Silver Hollow claim. And whoever else knew, they were not going to let me keep it. Silas came at 8 in the morning. He rode up the same as before. This time when he swung down from the saddle he stopped. He was looking at the frost. He looked at the ground. He looked at me. He didn't smile. Ellie, I know. How long have they been there? I found them this morning. He knelt down. He touched the edge of one of the prints with 2 fingers. He was very quiet. These are recent. Last night. He walked a slow circle around the shack, his head down, his hat pulled low. He was gone maybe 4 minutes. When he came back his jaw was set. 2 men. One tall, one shorter. They came up on foot from the logging road. They stood at your window for 11, maybe 12 minutes. Then they walked back down. There's an SUV track at the bottom of the ridge. Wide tires. Something heavy. How do you know all that from footprints? Marine Corps. Before business school. I stared at him. You keep dropping these things on me. I'm sorry. I'm not complaining. He almost smiled. Then he didn't. Ellie, you cannot stay up here alone. I'm not leaving. I didn't say leave. I said not alone. Silas, I'll bring my things this afternoon. I don't care where I sleep. You are not spending another night up here by yourself. Your mother, Opal, is coming to stay with Mama for a few days. I already called her this morning. Before I rode up. Because I've been thinking about your situation since I left you last night. And I did not like what my thinking was telling me. I looked at him. I should have been angry. I was not angry. I was relieved, which was terrifying in its own way. We stood in the shack together an hour later. The journal was open on the table between us. Silas had read 6 pages in silence. He was on page 7. His hand was flat on the wood beside the leather cover. He was very still. He turned another page. He stopped. He read a paragraph. He read it again. Then he looked up at me. And his face had gone gray. Ellie. What? Your father's company. Ashcombe Meridian. I know that name. You worked in New York. Everyone in finance knows that name. No. No, Ellie. I know that name from somewhere else. Something cold moved through my chest. Where? He didn't answer right away. He walked to the window. He stood with his back to me, and he stared out at the pines, and his shoulders rose and fell one time. Silas, sit down. Don't tell me to sit down. Tell me what you know. Sit down, Ellie. Please. I sat down. He turned around. He leaned against the window frame. And he told me. He had been 29 years old. 3 years out of business school. Working for a hedge fund in Manhattan on the 42nd floor of a building that touched the clouds. Making very good money. And he had noticed something. His fund. His division. His team. They were being asked to run trades that didn't make sense. Trades that lost money on purpose. Trades that moved cash from one shell company to another through a chain of legitimate-looking transactions that always ended in the Caymans. He was a smart man. He knew what he was looking at. He was looking at money laundering. He went to his boss. His boss told him to stop asking questions. He went to compliance. Compliance told him he was mistaken. He went to his boss again. His boss took him out for a very expensive dinner and explained to him, over a bottle of wine that cost more than his monthly rent, that certain very important people needed certain services performed, and that his cooperation would be very well compensated, and that his refusal would be very badly received. Silas said no. Silas started keeping copies. And 2 weeks before he was going to walk that file into the FBI's Manhattan field office, he came home to his apartment and found his front door standing open. Nothing had been stolen. Nothing had been damaged. But on his kitchen counter was a single photograph of his mother, sitting on her porch, in Montana, taken through a telephoto lens. There was a post-it note stuck to the corner of the photograph. It said, in neat block letters, "She's beautiful." Silas quit his job that night. He was on a plane home by morning. He never went to the FBI. He never turned in his file. He came home to his mother's ranch, and he learned to run cattle, and he learned to fix fences, and he tried to forget he had ever known what a Cayman Islands shell company was. and he had almost forgotten. Until this morning. Because in the third paragraph of the fourth page of my father's journal, my father had listed the names of 6 shell corporations he suspected my sister of using to launder money through Ashcombe Meridian. Silas recognized 4 of them. They were the same ones from his file. 3 years older. Bigger now. But the same. He finished the story. He was quiet. I was quiet. The wood stove crackled. Silas, you have to leave. No. You don't understand. If they find out you're here, they already know I'm here. What? Whoever stood at your window last night watched me help you get supplies out of the Bronco yesterday. My name is already on somebody's list. Then leave. Take Winnie and leave. Where? I don't know. Somewhere. There is nowhere. And I am not running again. He walked back to the table. He put his hand on the journal. Your father died trying to stop these people. My mother's photograph is why I ran the first time. I am not running from them a second time. Not while your father's daughter is standing in a shack on the side of a mountain with a book they want to burn. He said, so, we work. We dig. Silas, your father believed there was something behind that rock wall. Gold. Evidence. Maybe both. If we find it, we have leverage. Either way, we dig. He picked up his hat from the table. He put it on. He walked out to the shed to get the picks. The next 14 days broke me and remade me. I have never in my life worked so hard. I have never in my life hurt so much. I have never in my life been so grateful. We started at 7 every morning. Coffee on the wood stove. Cold biscuits Winnie had baked. A prayer Silas would murmur under his breath before we walked into the mine. Not for himself. For his mother. That she'd have a good day. Then the dark of the tunnel. The temperature dropped 20 degrees the moment we crossed the threshold. Our headlamps cut narrow yellow tunnels through blackness so complete it swallowed sound. We walked 400 yards in. We reached the wall. A massive slumped face of collapsed rock and broken timber that the county had condemned as a catastrophic hazard. The wall my father had spent $500,000 trying to breach and had failed. We were going to breach it with picks and a wheelbarrow and 2 people. It was insane. We started swinging anyway. The first day I lasted 3 hours before my arms gave out. I sat against the wet stone wall and I stared at my hands. Blood was crusted around my thumbnails. Every muscle in me was on fire. Silas set down his pick. He knelt beside me. He took my hands in his. He turned them palm up. He looked at the blisters. He looked at me. You should go up. No. Ellie. No. He didn't argue. He got up. He walked back to the wall. He kept swinging. I watched him swing for maybe 10 minutes. Then I got up. And I kept swinging too. By day 3 my hands had scabbed and cracked and bled again and scabbed again. Silas had wrapped them for me in strips of old flannel. He had done it kneeling on the shack floor without speaking. His fingers had been very careful. By day 5 I was sleeping like the dead. By day 7 we had cleared 6 feet of rubble. 6 feet. Out of a wall that was Lord only knew how many feet thick. I sat down in the dirt of the tunnel, and I put my face in my bandaged hands. Silas sat down beside me. He didn't touch me. He just sat. Then after a while he said, You are stronger than you know, Ellie. I'm not. You are? I'm nothing. Your father knew what you were. I looked at him. He was wrong about most things. He was not wrong about you. I closed my eyes. I got up. I picked up the pick. I kept swinging. The nights were what saved me. Every evening at 6, Silas would set down his pick and say, "Time to go home." And we would drive to the Merrick Ranch. And Winnie would be sitting in her chair by the window with her Bible open. And she would look up when we came in the door, and her whole face would light up like we were the sun rising. Sometimes she knew our names. Sometimes she did not. But she was always glad to see us. By the 5th night, Silas had cleared out the spare bedroom and put fresh sheets on the bed and told me, without discussing it, that I was going to sleep at the ranch from now on. I did not argue. I lay under Winnie's hand-embroidered quilt on the 6th night, and I stared at the small wooden cross on the wall above the headboard. My mother had believed. My mother had prayed the rosary every night of her life. I had stopped believing when she died. I had told God to go find someone else to talk to. But that night in the spare bedroom of the Merrick Ranch, under Winnie's quilt, looking at the cross on the wall, I whispered into the dark, "If you're there, I could use some help." I don't know if anyone answered, but I slept better that night than I had in 17 years. Winnie became something I did not have words for. She was not my mother. She would never be my mother. But she was something. She would meet me in the kitchen every morning, with a cup of coffee already poured. She would forget I took it black. She would put sugar in it every time. And every time I would drink it anyway. She would ask me to help her braid her hair. So I would stand behind her chair, and I would separate her long silver hair into 3 sections, and I would braid it slow and careful, the way my own mother had once braided mine. Winnie would close her eyes. She would hum a hymn I didn't know. And I would braid. One evening I was braiding her hair when she said, quietly, "Sweetheart, are you afraid?" "Ma'am? Are you afraid, sweetheart? About whatever you are doing up on that mountain?" I stopped braiding. "Winnie, I know I forget things, honey. But I am not blind, and I am not stupid. My son has been carrying a rifle in the truck for 2 weeks. He did not do that before you came. And you look like a person who is very tired, and very brave, and very afraid." I could not speak. She reached back. Her small warm hand found my hand, where it was frozen in her hair. "I will tell you what I know, Ellie. Good people always get paid. Not always in money. Not always on time. But God keeps a ledger, sweetheart. And He is not lazy about it. You just keep being who you are. And you let Him worry about the rest." I put my forehead against the top of her head. I did not cry. But something in me finally, quietly let go. I forgot about the letter for 11 days. The one Opal had given me. The wax-sealed envelope from my father. I had put it in the inside pocket of my canvas jacket the night I arrived, and I had not been able to open it. But on the 12th day, I was in the Silver Hollow General Store, when Opal looked at me across the counter. "Have you opened it yet, honey?" "No, ma'am." "Any particular reason?" "I'm afraid." She nodded. "Once. Sweetheart, you know what a letter from a dying man is?" "What?" "It's a hand reaching out of the ground. It doesn't grab you. It doesn't hurt you. It just wants to be held one more time." I sat in the Bronco in the gravel lot of the general store. I took the envelope out of the inside pocket of my jacket. The wax seal cracked in my hand. I unfolded the pages. My Ellie, if you are reading this, then you did what I hoped you would do. You did not give up. That is the girl I raised. That is the woman I always knew you were. I am so sorry. I am so sorry for every way I have failed you. When your mother died, I lost my mind for a while. You were 12. Your sister was 19. I was 51, and I had loved that woman since I was 20 years old, and I did not know how to be a person without her. I threw myself into work. I stopped coming home for dinner. I stopped tucking you in. Vivian raised herself. And you? You raised yourself too. And when I looked up 2 years later, Isolde was standing in the doorway of my office asking me if I wanted to have coffee sometime. And I said yes because I was lonely. And I married her because I was tired. And I did not see her for what she was. I see her now. Ellie, there is something I need to tell you, and I have been trying to tell it for a year, and I have not had the courage. It is about your sister, and it is about Isolde. And I do not want you to hate them until you have heard the whole story. Because it is not the story you think. Some of it is written in this letter. The rest is in the mountain. Behind the wall in the Black Bear Tunnel there is a chamber. In that chamber there is gold. Real gold. And also, there is a pelican case. It is black. It is modern. I put it there. Everything you need to understand what your family became is inside it. Do not trust Nathaniel Pruitt. Do not trust anyone at the company. When you have the case, find a woman named Rowan Delacroix. She works for the FBI in Denver. She is honest. She is the only one I could find who is. And Ellie, when you know everything, try to remember that your sister was 19 years old when her mother died, and her father disappeared, and a stranger walked into her house. Try to remember that. I love you more than my own life. Come home. Be free. Your father, Walter. I read the letter 3 times. Then I put it down on the passenger seat. Then I put my forehead against the steering wheel. Then I cried. I sat in the Bronco in the gravel lot of the Silver Hollow General Store, and I wept for my family. And when I was done, I wiped my face on my sleeve. I turned the key. I drove back to the mountain, because we still had a wall to break through. Day 13. I hit the wall for 6 hours. I did not speak. Silas did not speak. That night I sat on the porch of the Merrick Ranch, with a wool blanket around my shoulders. Silas sat beside me. Neither of us spoke for a long time. Then he said, "You are going to break through tomorrow." "How do you know?" "I can feel it in the rock. There is air behind the last 6 feet. There is a hollow space. You think tomorrow. I think tomorrow." I looked at him. The stars were very bright over the Bitterroots. Silas. Yeah. If something happens to me. Ellie. If something happens to me. Take care of Winnie. Nothing is going to happen to you. But if it does. He turned to look at me. "You take care of Winnie," he said. "You are going to walk out of that mine tomorrow, and you are going to take care of my mother with me. Do you understand? We are going to finish this together." I looked at him for a long time. "Okay." He nodded. He turned back to the mountains. And after while he reached over and he took my bandaged hand in his calloused one. He did not squeeze. He did not speak. He just held it. We sat like that until the moon rose. Day 14. Winnie had made pancakes. She had burned 3 of them. She had cried a little in the kitchen because she couldn't remember why she was cooking. Silas had held her and rocked her and said, "It's all right, Mama. Sit down. Let me finish." I had eaten the burned pancakes and told Winnie they were the best I had ever tasted. Because they were. Then we drove up to the mine. We walked in, and at 11:42 in the morning I swung the pick. And the tip snagged on a boulder, and I yanked, and the boulder shifted, and a crack ran across the surface of the stone, and I heard it. Not the terrifying rumble of a cave-in. The other sound. The hollow rushing sound of rocks tumbling into an empty space. Silas grabbed my shoulder. "Ellie." "I know. Ellie. I know." I heard it. A thin stream of cold black air began to hiss out of the crack behind the boulder. It smelled like ancient water. It smelled like a place that had been sealed for 138 years. We shoved the boulder together. It took both of us, every ounce of strength we had left. The boulder groaned and shifted and finally rolled backward into blackness and crashed onto something solid on the other side. A hole 3 feet wide opened in the wall. Silas turned his headlamp toward the hole. The beam went in. The beam went and went and went and did not hit anything. He looked at me. "Ellie, there is a room in there." "I know." I climbed through first. I don't know why. He would have gone. But I climbed through first because it was my father's cave, and my father's mountain, and my father's inheritance. I slid down a mound of loose dirt. My boots hit stone. I stood up. I turned in a slow circle. My headlamp swept the darkness. Stalactites hung from the ceiling like a chandelier in a cathedral. And in the center of the chamber, half buried in a mound of dirt that had spilled down centuries ago from a sinkhole above, the rotting remains of a wooden stagecoach. I climbed down the mound of dirt. I crossed the stone floor. My boots crunched on gravel that had not been walked on since the year 1887. I reached the wagon. I knelt in front of it, and half covered by sediment, wedged against the rotted timber of the wagon bed, was a leather saddlebag. The leather crumbled in my hands. I pulled the flap open, and I saw the gold. They were beautiful. Liberty Head double eagles. Dozens of them. Maybe hundreds. Stacked in tight rolls in the saddlebag, each coin catching the beam of my headlamp and throwing it back in a color that was somehow more than yellow. It was the color of morning. It was the color of every sunrise anyone had ever loved. I pulled one out. I wiped it on my jeans. I held it up. 1887. Mint condition. 1 coin worth more than my Ford Bronco. I sat down in the dirt beside the wagon. I laughed. I laughed until I was crying, and I cried until I was laughing again. Silas climbed down through the hole behind me, and he stopped at the edge of the mound, and he looked at what I was holding. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just took his hat off, slow, and held it against his chest, like a man in a church. But then I saw the other thing, because my headlamp swept past the wagon, because I turned to say something to Silas, because the beam of my headlamp caught something in the far corner of the chamber that did not belong. Something black, something modern, something plastic. I stood up. I walked toward it, slow, the gold coin still in my hand. I got closer, and I saw the white stenciled letters on the side. Property of Ashcombe Meridian Group. I stopped. Silas stopped behind me. Neither of us spoke for what felt like a very long time. Then he said, quietly, "Ellie, I know. That is a pelican case, with your father's company stenciled on the side." "I know, Silas." I knelt down in front of the case. I unbuckled the latches. They snapped open with a sound that echoed off the walls of the cavern like gunshots. I lifted the lid. 3 thick leather-bound ledgers filled with my father's handwriting. 2 encrypted hard drives. A manila folder. And an envelope, addressed to me, in my father's hand. "Eleanor, read the letter first." I opened it, with hands that were shaking so badly I tore the corner of the paper. "Ellie, if you are reading this, you have found the chamber. Inside these ledgers is everything I know. Every transaction, every shell company, every wire. Your sister has been laundering money through Ashcombe Meridian for at least 4 years. Isolde is the domestic cleaner. She uses her charities. She moves money through people who trust her because she looks so trustworthy. That is her real gift. But Ellie, there is one more thing. And this is the hardest thing I have ever written. I do not think your sister started this on her own. I do not think she started it at all. The hard drives will explain. Watch the video I made. It is the last one on the second drive. Watch it before you do anything else. Watch it before you go to the FBI. Watch it before you decide what to do with your sister. Because your sister is not the enemy, Ellie. She is another one of the victims. I sat on the cold stone floor of the chamber. I could not move. Silas knelt beside me. He read the letter over my shoulder. He said nothing for a long time. Then he put his hand on my back. Very gently. Ellie, we have to get this out of here. Ellie, listen. I stopped. I listened. I heard it. Far above us. Filtering down through the tunnel behind the breach. The sound of an engine. Coming up the road. Silas was on his feet in an instant. He clicked off his headlamp. I clicked off mine. The chamber went black. I heard him breathe. I heard him whisper. Ellie, grab the case. Grab as many coins as you can carry. Now! Right now! As fast as you can. And do not turn on your light. I moved. Blind. I shoved handfuls of the double eagles into the pockets of my canvas jacket until they were heavy enough to pull the fabric down. I felt for the case. I closed the lid. I latched it. I hoisted it. Silas took it from my hand. Behind me. Hand on my belt. I put my hand on the back of his belt. We climbed. Up the mound of dirt. Through the breach in the wall. Into the main tunnel. And that was when we heard the voices. 2 men. Coming down the tunnel. The beams of their tactical flashlights sweeping the walls ahead of them. They were maybe 200 yards away. Silas pulled me flat against the wall. I could feel his heartbeat. I could not tell if it was his or mine. The flashlight beams grew brighter. I heard one of the voices, distorted by the stone. Boss says charge is set in 5. Get the girl out or leave her. Doesn't matter. But we'd blow it either way. Copy that. Silas's mouth was against my ear. His voice was almost nothing. Ellie, when I say go, you run. You do not look back. You do not turn on your light until you are outside. You go left at the fork. You come out at the east entrance. Not the main. The east one. Small opening. Behind the pines. Do you remember? Yes. I am going to draw them the other way. Silas, you take the case. You get to the truck. You drive. Silas, no. Ellie, I am not leaving you in this mountain. You are? I am not. Ellie. His hand was on my face. His callous hand was on my face in the pitch dark of the tunnel. You are going to walk out of this mountain. And you are going to finish what your father started. And I am going to walk out 5 minutes behind you. Do you hear me? Silas. Do you hear me? I hear you. Say it back. I will meet you at the ranch. Good girl. The flashlight beams were closer now. Silas pressed the case into my hand. He pressed something else into my other hand. His pocket knife. He whispered, Go! He pushed me toward the fork in the tunnel. He turned the other way. And he clicked on his headlamp. Bright. Broad. Full beam. He shouted, Hey! You looking for me? And he ran. Away from me. Down the wrong tunnel. Pulling the men behind him like a fisherman pulling a hook. I ran. I ran with the case slamming against my thigh, and the coins jangling in my pockets, and my breath ragged in my throat. I ran left at the fork. I ran through darkness. So complete I ran, with one hand on the wall. I could hear them behind me, shouting, Boots on stone. I could hear Silas's voice, farther and farther away, drawing them off. And then I saw it. The pale gray of daylight ahead. The east entrance. I burst out into the pines. I fell to my knees in the pine needles. I scrambled up. I ran for the Bronco. I threw the case on the passenger seat. I fumbled the keys. I dropped them. I found them. I got the door open. And that was when the mountain exploded. It was not a boom. It was a roar. The earth heaved. A shockwave slammed into the Bronco and rocked it sideways on its springs. A cloud of dust and splintered pine and pulverized rock blasted out of both mouths of the mine and rolled down the mountainside like the breath of a dying god. Rocks the size of cars cascaded down the cliff face. The main entrance disappeared under 1,000 tons of debris. The east entrance folded in on itself. With a groan I felt in my teeth. The mountain sealed. Silas was inside. I sat frozen in the driver's seat, with the keys in the ignition and the dust rolling over the windshield. Silas was inside the mountain. I threw the door open. I stumbled out. I ran toward the collapsed entrance. I fell twice. I got up twice. I reached the wall of rubble. I clawed at it with my bare hands. I screamed his name. I screamed it until my voice broke. The mountain did not answer. I fell to my knees at the base of the rubble. Somewhere in the distance, below the ridge, I heard an engine start. I heard tires spin on gravel. I heard a black SUV drive away. They were leaving. They thought they had killed us both. They were wrong about me, but they might not have been wrong about him. I knelt in the dust in front of the sealed mountain, with the black pelican case at my feet and gold coins spilling from my jacket pockets, and I whispered his name one more time into the wall of stone. Silas. The wind moved through the pines, and nothing answered back. I do not know how long I knelt at the base of the rubble. Long enough that the sun moved. Long enough that my knees went numb through my jeans. I could not stand. Silas. The name kept repeating in my head like a prayer that had lost its meaning. I thought about his mother. I thought about Winnie sitting at the kitchen window, with her Bible open, waiting for us to come home for supper. I thought about how she would ask me his name, and how I would have to be the one to say it. That was what got me on my feet. Not courage. Not strength. It was Winnie. Because Winnie was sitting in that kitchen right now. And she did not know. And somebody had to tell her. I dragged myself to the Bronco. I could not feel my hands. The gold coins in my jacket pockets clinked with every step, and the sound was obscene. I got in. I turned the key. The engine caught. I put both hands on the wheel, and I stared at them for a moment. They were bleeding again. My knuckles were raw from clawing at the rubble. I drove. I pulled into the yard at the Merrick Ranch. The front porch was empty. The chestnut mare was standing at the fence. She looked at me. She whickered softly. She was waiting for him. I opened the truck door. I walked toward the house. My legs would not carry me straight. I climbed the steps. I pushed open the door. And Winnie looked up from her chair by the window with a smile so bright it broke me all over again. "Well, hello, sweetheart. Where's my boy? He's late for lunch." I opened my mouth. I could not speak. Winnie's smile faded slowly. Her old eyes searched my face. She said very quietly, "Come here, honey." I crossed the room. I knelt down beside her chair. I put my face in her lap. And I wept. I wept like a child. I wept like the world had ended. Because it had. And Winnie did not ask me a single question. She put her small warm papery hand on the back of my head. She stroked my hair. She hummed to him under her breath. And she waited. I could not tell her. I opened my mouth 3 times. Nothing came out. Finally, I lifted my head. Winnie, there was an accident. At the mine. She did not react. Silas was inside, I said. She nodded slowly. Winnie, I do not know if he... I do not know if... She reached out. She wiped a smear of dust off my cheek with her thumb. Sweetheart. Yes, ma'am. My son is alive. I stared at her. Winnie, my son is alive. I would know if he wasn't. A mother knows. I felt him leave his father when it happened. I would feel him leave me. I do not feel that. Do you understand me, honey? I do not feel that. I could not breathe. I wanted to believe her more than I had ever wanted anything. Now go wash your face. You go call for help. And you tell them my son is trapped in a mountain. And you tell them to get him out. She patted my cheek. She turned back to the window. She opened her Bible. She began to read. There was no cell service at the ranch. I drove 5 miles down the ridge to the paved road. I got 1 bar. I called 911. I told them there had been an explosion at a mine in the Bitterroots. I gave them the coordinates of the Silver Hollow claim. I gave them Silas's name. I told them to hurry. I hung up. And I understood something. I understood that whoever had blown up that mountain was going to come back to make sure. And they would find me at the Merrick Ranch with the case and the coins and Winnie in her chair by the window. And they would not leave any of us alive. I had to move. Now. I drove back to the ranch. Winnie was still in her chair. I knelt beside her again. I took both of her hands in mine. Winnie, I need you to be very brave. I need you to go to Opal's. Right now. I need you to pack a bag, and I need you to stay with Opal until this is over. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she nodded. Are the bad people coming, honey? Yes, ma'am. Then we go now. She stood up. She walked to her bedroom. She packed a small bag. Slowly. She packed her Bible, her reading glasses, a photograph of her husband from her nightstand, a wool cardigan. She looked around the room 1 time. Then she closed the door behind her. I drove her to town. Opal was on the porch of the general store before I had come to a full stop. She had seen the Bronco coming. She was waiting. I told her everything in 90 seconds. She did not ask a single question. She helped Winnie out of the truck. She took Winnie inside. She came back to my window. Ellie. Yes, ma'am. Where are you going? Denver. Denver. I have to end this. Opal reached in through the window. She put her small hand on my face. You bring my boy home, sweetheart. I will. Say it. I will bring him home. She nodded once. She stepped back from the truck. I drove east. I did not stop for 11 hours. I checked into a motel outside Missoula at 2 in the morning. Cash. Fake name. Back room. Curtains drawn. I bought a cheap laptop at 7 the next morning. I paid for it with a single gold coin at a pawn shop for $1,400. The pawnbroker looked at the coin, then at me. He did not ask questions. I went back to the motel. I locked the door. I sat on the bed. I opened the Pelican case. I plugged in the second hard drive. I entered the password my father had written on the inside flap. Ellie Grace 1996. The date of my birth. The drive unlocked. The last file on the drive was a video. The date stamp was 7 days before my father died. I clicked play. And there he was. My father. Alive. sitting in his study at Cherry Creek, his favorite green leather chair, his reading lamp glowing behind him, his hair thin and white, his hands trembling on his lap. He looked directly into the camera. His voice was thin. His voice was tired. But it was his voice. Ellie. I put my hand against the screen. If you are watching this, you have already found the chamber. You have already opened the case. I need you to listen very carefully, because what I am about to tell you is the reason I did not tell you any of this while I was alive. He paused. He looked away from the camera. He looked back. Your stepmother is not who I thought she was. Her real name is not Isolde Whitman. That was the name on the paperwork when she came into my life. I have spent the last 18 months paying private investigators to find out who she really is. And what I found, Ellie, what I found, it broke me. He closed his eyes for a moment. 25 years ago, I destroyed a man named Arthur Levine. He ran a competing firm. He was a good man. He was also a bad businessman. I outmaneuvered him. I took his clients. I bankrupted his company. And 2 months after his firm collapsed, Arthur Levine shot himself in his garage. I could not breathe. I did not know at the time that he had a family. I did not care. I was 38 years old, and I was hungry, and I was cruel. I did not investigate. I did not check. I just took what I wanted. And I have paid for it, Ellie. Because Isolde is Arthur Levine's cousin. And she has spent 25 years planning what she did to my family. I put both hands over my mouth. She met me at a fundraiser in 1999. She was very beautiful. She was very charming. She had changed her name legally. She had constructed a whole life. And when I met her, I was a lonely widower, and I fell for it. I married her. I let her raise my daughters. His voice broke. Ellie, Vivian was 19 years old when your mother died. She was fragile. She was angry. She missed her mother more than any of us knew. And Isolde saw that. And Isolde used that. She spent years, Ellie. Years. Whispering in your sister's ear. Turning her against you. Turning her against her own soul. She groomed your sister to hate. She groomed your sister to steal. She groomed your sister to launder money for the same criminal network that Isolde's cousins had built after Arthur died. She turned my daughter into a weapon. He was crying now. My father, who had never cried in front of me my entire life, was crying in this video. Vivian is not evil, Ellie. She is a broken girl who lost her mother and her father in the same year and was raised by a snake. I see that now. I see it too late. But I see it. And I am begging you. When you know everything. When you have the FBI on the line. Do not let them destroy your sister. She is a victim. She is also a criminal. Both things are true. But if there is any way, Ellie, any way at all, please, try to save her. He wiped his face. I love you, my Ellie. I love you both. Finish this. Set us free. The video ended. I sat on the motel bed in the dark. I did not move for a very long time. I called Special Agent Rowan Delacroix at 9 the next morning. I used a burner phone I bought at a gas station. She picked up on the second ring. Her voice was clipped. Professional. Middle-aged. Steady. Delacroix. Agent Delacroix. My name is Eleanor Ashcombe. My father was Walter Ashcombe. He told me to call you. There was a pause on the other end. A long one. Where are you, Miss Ashcombe? I don't want to say on the phone. Are you safe? No. Do you have documentation? I have 3 ledgers written in my father's hand, 2 encrypted hard drives, and a video. Another pause. Miss Ashcombe, do you know what a diner called Reba's off Interstate 90 looks like? I can find it. Booth in the back. 4 hours from now. Sit facing the door. Order coffee. I will find you. She hung up. She was exactly what I had pictured. Late 50s. Gray hair cut short and practical. A face that had seen everything and been surprised by very little. A cheap navy blazer over a plain white shirt. No jewelry. No makeup. Eyes that took in the entire diner in one sweep before she slid into the booth across from me. She looked at the pelican case on the seat beside me. She looked at my face. She looked at my bandaged hands. Miss Ashcombe. Agent. Show me. I put the case on the table. I unlatched it. I turned it around. She opened one of the ledgers. She read a single page. Then another. Then she closed the ledger. She rested her hand on top of it. She looked at me for a long moment. And her professional face slipped, and I saw something underneath. She saw the end of a very long road. Miss Ashcombe, how did your father get this? He built it. He spent the last 2 years of his life building it. He did not trust anyone at his firm. He did not trust his lawyer. He hid it in a chamber inside an abandoned mine. Where is your father now? He died 4 weeks ago. I am sorry for your loss. Thank you. Who else knows about this case? I hesitated. One other person. Where is he? Buried under a mountain in Montana. They collapsed the mine on top of him yesterday. Agent Delacroix put her hand slowly across her mouth. She looked at me over her fingers. Miss Ashcombe. Yes. You drove to Denver by yourself, with the case in your passenger seat. Yes. That was very brave. That was also very stupid. I know. She lowered her hand. She leaned back in the booth. All right. Your sister is holding a press conference in 2 days announcing a merger acquisition. That is where we do it. All right. You do not go home. You do not check into a hotel under your name. You stay with me. I put you in a safe house tonight. Are you with me? Yes. She reached across the table. She took my bandaged hand. She held it. For just a moment. Miss Ashcombe, I have been chasing this network for 11 years. Do you understand what you just gave me? Yes. Let's go. That night in the safe house, I could not sleep. I sat by the window of a nondescript apartment in an ordinary neighborhood in Denver. I looked at my phone. There was no news. I had checked 40 times. There was no news of a rescue. There was no news of a body. There was no news of a Marine Corps veteran turned cattle rancher who had drawn 2 hitmen away from a woman with a plastic case and had disappeared into a collapsing mine. I sat by the window, and I whispered his name, and I asked God to keep him breathing until somebody came. The morning of the press conference. I woke up at 4:30. At 5 I got up. I stood in front of the mirror in the bathroom of the safe house, and I looked at myself. The woman looking back at me was not the woman I had been 6 weeks ago. She was thinner. Her face was hollowed out. Her hands were still wrapped in bandages. There was a cut healing on her forehead that she did not remember getting. Her eyes were very quiet. She was harder than she had been. But also, she was more herself. I put on a plain black suit that Agent Delacroix had bought for me the day before. I brushed my hair. I put on my mother's wedding ring. I looked in the mirror one more time. I said very softly, "Okay, Daddy, let's go." The lobby of the Ashcombe Meridian Building. Denver. 10 in the morning. Glass and marble, and the low expensive hum of 150 people in fitted suits pretending to network. Champagne flutes on silver trays. camera crews from 3 financial networks. A dais at the front of the atrium, with a podium under 2 enormous digital screens flashing the company logo. I walked in through the revolving door. The security guards at the front desk, the exact same ones who had escorted me out of my father's estate 6 weeks ago, did not look at me, did not recognize me, because 6 weeks ago I had been a grieving girl in a wet funeral dress. Today I was a woman in a black suit, with her hair pulled back and her eyes very clear. I moved through the crowd. I did not smile. I did not speak. I walked to the very back of the atrium. I leaned my shoulder against a marble pillar. I waited. Agent Delacroix and her team were somewhere I could not see. Positioned. Ready. The lights on the dais came up. The room quieted. My sister walked out onto the stage. She was radiant. She was 36 years old in a crisp white suit, with her dark hair pulled back and her chin held high. She smiled at the cameras. She walked to the podium, with the easy grace of a woman who had been rehearsing this moment for a very long time. In the front row, Isolde, in cream silk, watching my sister with the fond, proud smile of a mother, the smile of a woman who had built a weapon, the smile of a woman who was about to fire it. Vivian reached the podium. She placed her hands on either side of it. She began to speak. Good morning. Today we begin a new chapter in the history of Ashcombe Meridian Group. My father built this firm from a single desk in a rented office. He believed that finance was a calling, that it was about serving people, and today we honor his memory by expanding that legacy. I stepped out from behind the marble pillar. I began walking down the center aisle. Slow, deliberate, every step. The people in the aisle seats turned first, then the middle rows, then the front. A camera swung in my direction, then another, then all of them. Vivian stopped mid-sentence. She looked up. She saw me. Her face did not do what I expected it to do. Her face did not go cold. Her face went white. She looked like a woman who had just seen a ghost. Because she had. I reached the front row. I stopped in front of Isolde. Isolde was staring at me, her mouth slightly open, her hand frozen halfway to her champagne flute. I did not look at her. I looked past her. I looked at my sister. I climbed the 3 steps up onto the dais. Vivian did not move. Vivian did not breathe. I walked to the podium. I stood beside her. The room was absolutely silent. I leaned toward the microphone. I said, "Hello, sister." Vivian's mouth opened. No sound came out. I turned to face the room. I saw the cameras. I saw a woman in a blue suit at the back of the atrium touch her earpiece. Agent Delacroix. Ready. I looked back at my sister. I said, quietly, so only she could hear, "Vivi, I need you to listen to me. I did not come here to destroy you." Her eyes filled. Fast. Involuntary. She said, "Ellie, I came to show you what she did to us. Ellie." "Ellie, don't. You need to see it. And I need you to see it now. Before anything else happens." I opened my bag. I pulled out a tablet. I set it on the podium in front of her. I tapped the screen. The video of our father began to play. Vivian looked down. She saw his face. She grabbed the edge of the podium. Her knuckles went white. She watched. Every second of it. She watched him say her name. She watched him say she is a broken girl who lost her mother and her father in the same year. She watched him say she is a victim. She watched him say try to save her. And I watched my sister's face. I watched 14 years of hardness break like a piece of glass hit with a hammer. I watched something behind her eyes, that had been locked for a very long time. Come loose. She lifted her head from the screen. She looked at Isolde in the front row. She looked at her. Really looked at her. For the first time. Maybe. In her whole adult life. And Isolde saw it. Isolde stood up. Isolde turned to leave. That was when the doors of the atrium blew open. 12 federal agents in dark tactical vests moved into the room with the practiced speed of people who had done this 100 times. Agent Delacroix walked at the front, her hand on her hip, her badge in her other hand. She called out in a voice that carried to every corner of the marble atrium. Isolde Ashcombe, you are under arrest. Nathaniel Pruitt, you are under arrest. Everyone else, sit down. Nobody leaves this room. The atrium exploded. Shareholders scattered. Reporters shouted. Cameras flashed. Isolde turned. She tried to run. She made it 4 steps before an agent had her arm. She screamed. A high, thin sound. A sound I had never heard her make. Get your hands off me! Do you know who I am? Agent Delacroix walked calmly through the chaos. She stopped in front of Isolde. She said very quietly, I know exactly who you are, Miss Levine. Isolde stopped struggling. Her face went blank. The last piece of the woman she had pretended to be fell off. They led her away in handcuffs. Nathaniel Pruitt was crying by the time they reached him. A 71-year-old man in a $3,000 suit weeping into his tie as they zip-tied his wrists. I stayed on the dais. I watched. And beside me my sister sank slowly to her knees on the polished wood of the stage, her white suit crumpling around her, her hands over her face, her shoulders shaking. I knelt down beside her. I put my arms around her. She turned into me. She buried her face in my shoulder. She sobbed the way you sob when you have been holding it in for 14 years. I held my sister. I held her while the cameras flashed. I held her while the federal agents finished their arrests. And in her ear I whispered, It's okay, Vivi. I have you. I have you. She whispered back through her tears, I am so sorry. I know. I am so sorry, Ellie. I know. I have you. I have you. We stayed on the dais floor for a long time. 2 sisters, on their knees, on a stage, in the wreckage of the family that had been built on a lie. I did not go home that night. I could not go home. I did not have a home. I went with Agent Delacroix to the FBI field office in downtown Denver. I gave a statement that lasted 6 hours. I gave a statement about the chamber, about the coins, about the case, about my father, about my sister, about my stepmother, about Silas, especially about Silas. I told them where the mine was. I told them the coordinates. I told them there was a man buried in that mountain who had drawn 2 killers away from me, and I did not know if he was still breathing, but I needed them. I needed them to send everyone. Agent Delacroix took my hand across the interview room table. Miss Ashcombe, rescue teams have been on that mountain since yesterday afternoon. Federal, state, and county. Search and rescue dogs. Structural engineers. Because you called it in. Because you had the coordinates. Because you did it before you did anything else. Is he alive? She looked at me. They have not found him yet. I put my head down on the table. I did not cry. I was out of crying. She squeezed my hand. Miss Ashcombe. Yes. They also have not found a body. I lifted my head. She said, There is a lot of mountain to dig through, and they have found air pockets in the tunnel structure. The county engineer says it is not impossible. That is all I can tell you. I nodded. I could not speak. They found him on day 3. Alive. He had been trapped in a small pocket of the tunnel about 60 feet in. His left leg was broken in 2 places. His right shoulder was dislocated. He had lost a great deal of blood from a laceration on his scalp. He had rationed a single water bottle. He had prayed the rosary his mother had taught him as a boy, over and over. In the dark, they pulled him out on a stretcher at 4:17 in the afternoon. I was in the parking lot of the field hospital they had set up in Silver Hollow. Winnie was in the front seat of a state trooper's car. Opal was standing beside the car, with her arm around Winnie's shoulders. I was standing in the gravel, watching them carry him out. He was pale. He was bandaged. His eyes were closed, but his chest was moving. His chest was moving. I ran. I ran across that parking lot. I ran the way I had run out of the collapsing mine. I reached the stretcher. The paramedics stepped back. I put my hand on his face. His eyes opened. Slow, blue-gray and clouded with morphine and dust. He saw me. He smiled. Weakly, he whispered, "I told you I would meet you at the ranch." I laughed. I laughed and cried at the same time. I bent down. I pressed my forehead to his. "You are 3 days late," he said. "Cattle got out." I choked on the laugh. I kissed his forehead. I kissed his cheekbone. I kissed the dust caked in his hair. I did not kiss his mouth. Not yet. Because his mother was watching from 20 feet away, and Winifred Merrick had raised her son right. They loaded him into the ambulance. I climbed in with him. I did not let go of his hand the entire ride to the hospital in Missoula. The year that followed was the longest year of my life. And the shortest. Isolde Levine. Real name recovered. Real history exposed. Was indicted on 31 federal counts. Wire fraud. Money laundering. Racketeering. Conspiracy to commit murder for the mine collapse. She was convicted on 29 of the 31 counts. She was sentenced to 22 years in federal prison. She was in her early 50s at sentencing. She will be an old woman when she walks out. Nathaniel Pruitt pled guilty within a week of his arrest. He gave up everything. He was sentenced to 11 years. He died of a heart attack in his cell 6 months into his sentence. Vivian cooperated fully. She turned over every document. She testified against Isolde for 4 days on the witness stand. She helped Agent Delacroix roll up a network that stretched from Denver to Miami to the Cayman Islands. The prosecutors offered her a plea. 5 years of supervised probation. 2,000 hours of community service. Mandatory therapy. A permanent bar from any executive role in a financial institution for the rest of her life. Full financial restitution from her personal accounts. She took the deal. The judge accepted it. I sat in the courtroom the day she pled. She looked at me from the defense table before she stood up. She mouthed the words, "Thank you." I mouthed the words, "I love you." We did not need to say more. I took over Ashcombe Meridian Group. I did not want to. I did it anyway. Because my father had built it, and there were 4,200 people who worked there, and they had mortgages and children, and they did not deserve to lose their jobs, because my family had lost its mind. I brought in new leadership. I cleaned house. I moved the firm toward environmental impact investing, which had been my father's dream, which he had never had the courage to try. I appointed a non-profit board to manage the recovered gold. Most of it went to the Montana State Historical Society. A small portion was auctioned. The proceeds funded the Walter Ashcombe Scholarship Fund. 50 full tuition scholarships each year for girls from rural backgrounds studying environmental science and geology. And in Silver Hollow, in the tiny town where my father had gone to sit at Opal's back table and drink her coffee and talk about the daughter he loved, I opened a small clinic. Free medical care, Alzheimer's support, home visits for elderly residents in the surrounding valleys. The kind of place where a country doctor could sit and listen to an old widow talk about her husband for an hour, and nobody would rush her out. I named it the Winifred Merrick Memory Center. I told Winnie before we opened. She was frail now, so much smaller than the woman I had first met. Her mind was mostly a soft place, with occasional windows of clarity. I sat with her on the porch of the ranch. I told her. She looked at me with clouded eyes. She smiled a small smile. She said, "That's a nice name, sweetheart." "Whose name is that?" "That's your name, Winnie." She patted my hand. "That's a very nice name." She turned back to the mountains. She hummed to him. Winnie died on a soft afternoon in late September, just over a year after we buried my father. She died in her chair by the window, with her Bible in her lap, and the sun on her face, and Silas holding one of her hands, and me holding the other. She had been quiet all morning. Then she opened her eyes. She looked at Silas. She looked at me. She smiled. She said, very clearly, "My beautiful children." And then she closed her eyes. And then she was gone. We buried her next to her husband in the small cemetery in Silver Hollow. Half the town came. Opal read a passage from Ecclesiastes. Silas did not speak. He stood at the graveside, with my hand in his, and he looked at his mother's coffin, and his eyes did not leave it until the last shovel of earth fell. That night we sat on the porch of the ranch. The stars were very bright. He said, "Ellie." "Yes." "Will you marry me?" I did not answer right away. I looked at him in the porchlight. His scars, his limp, his quiet gray-green eyes. The man who had drawn 2 killers away from me. The man who had held my hand through the surgery on his own leg. The man who had knelt beside his mother's chair every morning for the last year and asked her, patiently, if she wanted tea. I said, "Yes." He nodded. "Once." He said, "Good." Then he leaned over and kissed me on the mouth for the first time. Slow. Careful. The way a man kisses a woman he plans to spend the rest of his life kissing. I closed my eyes. We got married the following spring. Not a big wedding. 50 people. In the pasture behind the ranch. Under a wooden arch Silas built, with his own hands, from timber he cut on his own land. I wore my mother's veil. I carried a bouquet of wild lupin I picked that morning from the ridge above the mine. Opal walked me down the aisle. Because there was nobody else. Because my father was gone. Because my mother was gone. Because Winnie was gone. And because Opal Hensley had held me the night I stumbled into her general store, and she had earned the right to give me away. Vivian came. She wore a simple pale blue dress. She was 38 years old, and she looked 20. Because the poison had finally left her. She stood in the front row on the bride's side. She was my only family there. She was the only family I needed. She wept through the entire ceremony. I did not. I had done all my crying. Now I only had joy. Sometimes, on the coldest nights, I walk out to the fence at the edge of our property. I stand where the pasture ends and the pines begin. I look up at the mountain that swallowed a man alive and then gave him back to me, and I think about what it all meant. I think about how a family is not always the people who share your blood. Sometimes a family is the old woman in the general store who hugs you when you walk in. Sometimes it is the cowboy who draws killers away from you into a collapsing tunnel. Sometimes it is the mother-in-law who forgets your name every morning and pours you coffee anyway. I think about how forgiveness is not something you do for the person who hurts you. It is something you do for yourself. Because hatred is a stone you carry, and you cannot climb a mountain with a stone in your hand. I think about my father, who was not perfect, but who loved me, and who tried, in the end, to make it right, whose last act on this earth was to leave me a map, not to gold. To myself, I put my hand on the top rail of the fence. I say quietly into the dark, "Thank you," for the hole in the ground that turned out to be a doorway, for the disaster that turned out to be a beginning, for the sister I got back, for the mother I was given a second time, for the father who loved me enough to hide the truth in a mountain and trust me to find it. Thank you for all of it. I turn around. I walk back to the house. The porch light is on. Silas is waiting for me. He always waits up. I climb the porch steps. He opens the door. He does not ask where I have been. He knows. He always knows. He just steps aside, and I walk in, and I come home.